Hey, in this video, I'm just going to talk about a sort of theory for a version of ACE in OoT3D that does not work, to be clear. There's a couple reasons why this doesn't work, but the point of this video is not this method in particular. It's more just like an example of the type of patterns we'd be looking for in the game that might lead to major discoveries with SRM or potentially maybe even forms of ACE. Um, yeah, so this is going to involve the business scrub actors. Um, so first, let's just take a look at how the business scrubs work, if you're not familiar. So there's two different actors for the business scrubs. There's EN Shopnuts. These are the hostile grounded enemy business scrubs. And when they get damaged, they actually end up spawning an EN DNS. This is the actual salesman NPC that actually sells you the goods. And if we go into the shop nuts actor, we can actually find where it spawns this is the projectile. We can actually find where it spawns the DNS, the salesman, right here on this line. And now, so the notable thing about this that we care about is the parameters for the salesman that gets spawned. And we can see here that it spawns the exact same parameters. It just straight up copies the params variable from the enemy business scrub. So whatever params the enemy business scrub has will be the exact same params that the salesman that gets spawned has. So what do those params actually mean for the salesman? Well, it's what it sells. So there's these structures for the salesman that are just a collection of data for their price, how many of it they sell, the get item ID, and then two function pointers. One for checking whether you're able to buy that thing, the purchasable check, and the other one changes your rupee count and any flags, like in the save context if necessary. So there's a whole bunch of these structures that are defined. So like the one here in Lost Woods that I'm standing in front of right now is going to be pointing to this one. It's the stick upgrade. And there's references to each of these structures in this array. And all the scrub's parameters they are the index into this array. So it just gets a pointer. The business scrub owns a pointer to one of these structures. Also, I guess I'll throw out a note here that I'm looking at the decomp for the N64 version. This is all identical in 3DS. It's the same. The specific numbers might be different, but the code is the same. So, right. So the interesting thing here is these function pointers. So what you may already have noticed or not is if the params for the salesman were to overflow this array, they would interpret some other data as this structure. And in particular, these function pointers might be something we could actually manipulate. So what happens is once you talk to the salesman, once you've said okay to buying his things, the game just runs that purchasable check. So in theory, we might actually have some control over what function gets called right here. And this would be a very limited, but, well, potentially very limited, potentially not. This would be a form of ACE, sort of. Depends who you ask. um, and so let's take a look. I made this spreadsheet here that shows us for different params of the salesman what memory address it would look at for that structure with all the data about what it sells. And the most interesting one I came across while I was looking at this, there might be others, with params 11CF, it'll look at 55F9B8. And this is for the USA version, I should say. This would be different, potentially, on other versions of the game. This memory address is really, really interesting because with this memory address, that purchasable check function is actually going to be read from save file 3's Scarecrow song, which is something that we have a lot of control over, of course. So this seems really powerful, right? Let's say we did SRM, and right here, okay, so on the 3DS screen here, I have this is the memory viewer of that business scrub in front of me. So let's change its params to 11CF. Okay, and now we can go ahead and spawn the salesman, and if we look at the salesman, we can see its params are 11CF. They did get copied over. But here's the real problem. Here's why this doesn't work in its current form. If we look at his text ID down there, 1E01, that's going to be a what's that text box. That's not a valid text ID. Which if we go look back at the code, these message context check things aren't going to end up going through because of that. So that's why this doesn't work, is because the params for the business scrub also determine the text ID. So we're going to end up overflowing this array of text IDs. And in this case, it turns out to be a text box that we can't do anything with, and that purchasable check is never going to get run. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually go back in the game and unhack these params so that his text ID goes back to what it would have been if there was no editing in the first place. And this is just going to take 1 sec while I type in the numbers. So here's that 11CF, and we'll just change it right back to 9. Okay, so now his text ID is going to be back to what it normally would be. But he's still got looking at that wrong structure from when he was spawned. So I've already memory hacked file 3's Scarecrow song appropriately here to get a flashy effect. When I go run up and talk to him, and I say, well, it doesn't matter what I say, but you can see now I have a title screen file. So that was just the function I chose to call with this. Right, so the point here is not that I think that this would end up working someday because of that text ID problem. I personally haven't thought of a way around that. It's possible with different params for the business scrubs things could line up with a working text ID and still pointing to some memory value that we could manipulate for the function call you know, there's lots of possibilities, but the real point of this video was to kind of show off what sort of patterns we'd be looking for with SRM to potentially lead into some version of ACE for this game that would potentially be useful for speedruns. So, yeah, I encourage people who want to research this stuff to do it and ask any questions that I might be able to help with, or other people might be able to help with, because it would be really cool to have people working on this kind of stuff.